right, folks, today's episode is brought to you by my favorite sponsor. It is the one whose products I use every day. Sometimes I use multiple products per day. Of course, I'm talking about sunsetlakesebede.com. If you use the coupon code LEFTISBEST, you're going to get 20% off. For instance, last night, I woke up in the middle of the night, don't know why, and my calves were itchy. And my legs, my legs were, I don't know. It's strange. I know it.
Your famous calves?
It's just the driest part of my body. And I used this stuff right here, the Recovery Body Lotion. It's unscented. I never used lotion before, but this stuff I like. I don't know why. Maybe because it's unscented, or maybe the Sebede in there does something. I don't know. But I also use the melatonin Sebede gummies last night to go to sleep. Sometimes I use the tincture, and I'll use sometimes the smokables on the weekend if I'm, after a big meal or getting lit, as it were. But they have keef and they have pre-rolls. They have embedded fudge. They've got salves, which I use for, people use it. It's got arnica and Sebede, and people use it for muscle aches. I use it for eczema. There's all sorts of products they have. They have great Sebede infused coffee. That's my weekend brew when I still need my caffeine, but I don't need to be so jittery. It's just a great company. They recently they gave $1,000 as an example to the bus driving strikers in Detroit. Detroit. I can't remember exactly. I'll look that up and we'll talk about that in the future. But in the past, I know they've given thousands upon thousands of dollars to things like refugee resettlement and strike funds. They supported the nurses in Worcester. They have given money to food pantries and to give directly, on and on and on. Just a great company, great movement partner. They have great agricultural practices, integrated pest management. That means no pesticides or herbicides in your Sebede. Check them out, sunsetlakesebede.com. Use the code LEFTISBEST. They're fans of the show. You get 20% off. You will not be disappointed. They also have the THC Sebede gummies, which I have been availing myself of quite a bit these days. Now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, March 3rd, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, executive editor of The American Prospect, a friend of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Long time. David Dayen will be joining us. Then, later in the program, we'll take phone calls. Opened up a little space for phone calls today. So I was so bad about it early in the week. Meanwhile, the Fed signals their attack on labor is not over. Joe Biden blindsides D.C. on its crime bill. North Carolina to expand Medicaid. Florida bill would call for registration of online critics of Governor DeSantis.
Bloggers, most specifically.
Yeah, what is that? What is a blogger?
I know they said it like 40 times in the article. It's like
it doesn't mean anything.
DeSantis hates bloggers, I guess.
House Ethics Committee begins its George Santos inquiry. Residents erupt at an East Palestine, Norfolk Southern meeting. Tennessee bans drag shows on public property. Meanwhile, Barry Weiss's St. Louis Children's Hospital gender care so-called whistleblower story completely falls apart. Walgreens will not dispense abortion pills in Republican-controlled states. German Chancellor Scholz in Washington to discuss a Ukraine endgame. And to the best of my knowledge, we're going on day 5, 8 of the Conn College, my alum. What am I? My alum? What?
Yeah, you're an alma mater.
My alma maters. Students there are occupying an administrative building to get the president to resign because she was chasing after some real racist money to support the school. Good for them. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Casual Friday has arrived. Very quick week in the news. Of course, Emma Vigland's here. Emma may disagree. I don't know. Do you disagree with me? My assessment of that?
What do you mean by a quick week?
I don't know. Felt like it. No?
Do you agree that time is dilated?
Yeah, I mean, I just need a little bit more clarity on what you mean about a quick week in the news.
Well, I don't know. I mean, today I was like, we've had some great interviews the past couple of months, like the things that could be best ofs, like the one with the Erskines, right? Was that the professor?
Oreskes?
Oreskes.
Yeah, Naomi Oreskes.
And then you told me it happened on Monday, and I was like, Monday of this week?
Literally 4 days ago.
So I can't tell. Like it progressed very quickly because it feels like 3 weeks has passed since Monday.
I understand. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we just have different assessments of time. I hope that's okay with you. Please.
Get Einstein on the phone.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. All right.
That's what he meant by the theory of relativity, right?
I guess
some weeks go faster than others.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
There's a lot of talk right now. As you know, one of the things that folks were hoping for, if the Democrats got control of the Senate and the House and the presidency, was to finally allow for D.C. statehood, among other things. That hopes for that were dashed by Joe Manchin and probably Kristen Sinema. But Joe Biden has been a staunch supporter of what is known as home rule for Washington, D.C. I don't know if, I would hope that most people know this, although it's conceivable they don't. Washington, D.C. does not have any type of federal representation, or at least voting representation in the House, obviously not in the Senate. And they are essentially under the function under the auspices of the U.S. House and Senate. They're considered. I mean, there is a mayor and a city council, but the legislative branch of the federal government and the executive branch have final say over what happens in Washington, D.C. Now, this, of course, probably sounds completely unjust to you. And that's why Joe Biden has been such a staunch supporter of home rule, except when there are certain things he doesn't agree with, apparently. Here is, do we know who the reporter is? Unidentified White House press corps reporter asking White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, how is Joe Biden going to not veto a piece of legislation coming from the Republican Senate? Republicans, coming from the Republican-controlled House and maybe the Senate, if he's in favor of home rule.
Either you can make decisions for yourself, or I will make decisions for you.
But
that I believe in your best interests.
the decision that he is making, he's making it for the people of DC. right? By making sure. Yeah, but no, I understand that. But this is being presented to him, right? This is being presented to him on signing this into law. And if you look at what is being presented to him, the mayor actually disagreed with what the DC Council put forward. And so now this is an opportunity to protect the community. That's the way the president sees this, to protect the community.
Well, that's pretty paternalist and anti-democratic.
There's two things that are going on here. One is there's the broader meta question of like, do you believe in home rule or not? Do you, like, okay, you found a guy, the mayor who not a guy, but I'm saying a person who disagrees with it. That's the mayor, but the mayor cannot overrule the city council. And you're intervening and allowing the Republican House and the Senate, certainly mostly driven by Republicans in terms of this legislation, if it gets to his desk, to determine what Washington does, DC does. That's aside from the legislation. Plus, the legislation itself has been completely demagogued and is, frankly, not anything of what they say it is.
Yeah, it's like the reduction of max penalties for things like carjacking. And
yes, from 48 years to 24 years.
God forbid. Yeah, I mean, it's just how...
Carjacking is going to get rampant now in Washington, D.C. because people are like, you know what? 48 years, that's too heavy of a lift. But 24, I could do that.
Yeah, this Land Rover's worth that.
I can do that.
Broken car doors theory. How can you say you're in favor of DC home rule when, like, this is the first time in your presidency, but from my recollection, that you've had to make take an action on that supposed belief of yours? And yet you're completely contradicting that that supposed value that you have.
It's like being pro-strike and then breaking a rail strike.
I mean, you can see how Jean-Pierre is struggling with this because, like, how do you say that he's doing this for the people? The people elect their representatives. There is no he's doing it for the people. The people have a way in which to hold to account, frankly, the DC City Council. They have no way to hold to account the U.S. Senate or the U.S. House because they don't have representatives there. Right. It really is, I mean, just astonishing and just absurd and just an incredible sign of cowardice because, again, the Democrats they lost only in places where this type of stuff was hyped, not where it was ignored. Mm-hmm. Reminder, poor electoral strategy, if that's what this is. We're going to be talking to David Dayen in a moment. He may have a couple words about that as well. But first, a couple words from our sponsors. I made 3 great meals last week for the kids. Well, actually, Mila made one. But I was in part, responsible for her existence. So I will take credit for that. I have had in the past other like food ingredient delivery services, and they've been, some have been good. Some of the food has been really good. One of the problems I had with them is that it was supposed to be about convenience, and it took too long to make the recipes. And that is, for me, on top of the fact that I found them delicious and all the ingredients fresh, the best part for me for HelloFresh. They makes mealtime easy. They have delicious recipes, very fresh, wholesome ingredients. They're delivered to your door. They are... Their packaging is about as environmentally friendly as it can be. Also, they make each meal separate, which is also super important because when you put it in your fridge, I don't want to be searching for anything. I want it to go as quick as possible. Mm-hmm. Make a home cooked meal, and with as little hassle as possible. And that's what HelloFresh does. HelloFresh is significantly cheaper than grocery shopping, 25% less expensive than takeout. HelloFresh has 40 weekly recipes to choose from. They have meals for all sorts of occasions and lifestyles and preferences. You can take your pick from like meals like they have like a soy glazed salmon with rice, or they have a mushroom chive risotto. If you're vegetarian, you can even customize select meals by swapping proteins or sides or adding a protein to a veggie dish if you want. March, as you may or may not know, National Nutrition Month. HelloFresh makes it easy for you to choose delicious, dietitian-approved meals. So you look for the dietitian win tag on their menu choices for meals that are under 700 calories with 1/3 less sodium. I had a delicious pasta meal, and then a meatballs with like a bulgogi sauce. Excellent meals. But for me, in addition to them being fresh and being able to make a home cooked meal, easy, quick, gotta be quick. Go to HelloFresh.com/majority60 and use the code majority60, that's a 60, for 60% off plus free shipping. That is not a mistake, ladies and gentlemen. They want you to try this because once you do, you're going to really appreciate it. That's HelloFresh.com/majority60. The code is majority60, that's 60, for 60% off plus free shipping. Check it out today. Also, today's program is sponsored by Aura. As you know, I believe, justifiably so, but maybe excitedly so, nervous about having my ID stolen. It is a huge pain, difficult, and it's also just, I don't know, it's creepy. And if you want to save your, protect your online identity, your credit, whatever it is, Aura is your go-to app that includes everything you need to stay safe online. It protects you from scammers and hackers by scanning the dark web. That's where your emails and passwords and sometimes social security numbers are traded by people who have got them in data leaks, whether it's from, I feel like every single thing I've used has had a data leak, including my healthcare provider, Twitter, and then I put my email into Aura when I first signed up, and it kicks back where your email and passwords have been compromised. And then there were sites that I had no idea. I'd totally forgotten I had signed up for. So that was, I don't know, they don't mention that as a value, but for me, that was a big deal because then I just went and canceled all these different things. Also, on top of which, Aura helps you fight back against those annoying websites that make your public information or your private information, personal information, I should say, public. They automatically send requests to remove it, which is what you got to do. You got to keep doing that, but you don't have to because Aura does it. Aura gives you near real-time alerts on suspicious credit inquiries. So that time I opened up a bank account for Mila, they sent me an alert. Fortunately, I knew it was me, but you want to keep people from setting up fake credit cards in your name, etc. They have a VPN, allows you to stay anonymous online, keeps your browsing history, personal information safe and encrypted. They protect your devices from viruses, malware, spyware, all of the ware, so that bad guys can't get in there. I don't know, hold your computer hostage or get your data. Aura also helps you manage what your kids can do on their devices. You can set screen times, limits. You can set focus times. You can wall off certain apps. They also have a password manager that lets you store and access your online passwords securely and conveniently. You might have an app that does one of these things, but Aura is the app that does all of these things. You don't need 7 different apps. Let Aura do the hard work of keeping you safe online. If you sign up right now, Aura is going to give you a 2-week free trial with my link. You're going to be shocked how much of your private information Aura finds exposed over those 2 weeks. Go to aura.com/majority. That's AURA.com/majority. Start your free trial. It's also linked in the description below this YouTube, or if you're listening in the podcast description, or at majority.fm. And lastly, we get that QR code ready. I mentioned this the other day. You guys have been incredibly helpful for these folks. Also for the folks that Matt had mentioned yesterday on the show. We're putting a link to a GoFundMe to save the Rancho Evergreen Horse Sanctuary. It is located in Chiapas, Mexico. This is the area where the Zapatistas came from. And it's really deep in the woods, and it's basically a sanctuary for horses. Any given time, they have over a dozen horses that are there. It is run by Sam and Stephanie. They teach the philosophy of respect, understanding, and connection with horses. So it ends up healing a lot of people as well. Sam is of Cherokee blood. He's a horse whisperer. Apparently, he developed this this talent at the Gray Indian Mountain Reservation. And at one point after then, I think it was, he may have worked at a racetrack. Or no, I'm sorry, it was after that or not. But he worked at a racetrack, saw how horrifically the horses were treated, and basically decided to create this sanctuary, and unfortunately got hit by a horrible fire. Sam is been diagnosed with a potentially life-threatening illness, which makes it that much harder. And they need some help rebuilding. You can see the pictures of the fire, really devastating. Just a very dedicated family, friend of the show, has a connection with these folks, and we just thought we'd let you know about it. We'll put up a QR code so that you can go to it, the site, and we will also put the link in our podcast and YouTube descriptions. Did you put up that QR code? Put it up one more time so that people can get it there. And
we'll have it in the break too.
Okay, we'll have it in the break. So get your phones ready and check that out. It is also, you can go to bit.ly/save horse sanctuary. You can head that way as well. But we'll put the QR code and we'll come back with David Dayen. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the show the executive editor of the American Prospect, frequent guest on the Jon Stewart program, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
David Dayen.
Wait, what time is it right now?
You have to do his show? Do you have to go run do his show?
Got it. I got to get out.
Yeah, I know.
I gotta say, I listened to that, David, and he might talk over you more than we do. So he has us
Well,
beat there.
He's allowed.
Yes,
He's earned it.
for sure.
All right. Well, I mean, I sort of feel like we may have earned it too. Whatever. It's not important. That's not important. Let's just move on.
How many Emmys for you?
Is that what I mean, come on. You've seen my work. You've seen my work up close. You don't need. You don't need an Emmy.
I've seen both yours and John's stand-up work, so I don't want to make the comparison.
Well, but have you ever seen his acting? You've seen my acting.
That is true. I actually think you're very close there. If not, I think you actually soar ahead of him on that.
Oh yeah, soar ahead is not close.
Were you up for Death to Smoochie? Were you up for that role?
That one was not one that I was available for.
No.
All right, David Dayen. I don't know. We got really
gone completely off the rails.
That was predictable though.
It's okay. I'm pushing buttons. That's all.
Let's start with this week has been one of those weeks where like sort of some of the real stuff that is happening has happened sort of like on the layer that we don't really get that doesn't really reach like Google News, if you will. One of the biggest, I think, sort of in the implications. I'm curious as to what the implications of this would be from your perspective. Marty Walsh leaving the Department of Labor, heading to the NHL. Give me your take on his. I mean, because there's been two areas where I think like the Biden administration has been has met expectations, maybe exceeded, arguably, and that is on the anti-monopoly side. I think maybe in some respects, maybe even exceeded it. On the labor side, there's some pluses and there's some positives and some minuses. Give me your sense of Marty Walsh as a labor secretary, and then let's talk about how much of an upgrade this is.
Well, my understanding was Walsh was pretty sidelined at DOL. He was not sort of a major player in economic debates. Interestingly, he never moved from Boston. He never left Boston to move to Washington. And so he would come in temporarily. That's probably not a way to increase your clout inside an executive administration. My understanding was on the key stuff, he did not really have a major voice. The Labor Department, certainly parts of the Labor Department and parts of the labor agenda in the administration have flourished. I think that's more of a function of the National Labor Relations Board and what they've been able to do. It's a function of Biden being really interested in also on the antitrust side in sort of the labor aspects of that. Things like non-competes, which didn't come out of the Labor Department, it came out of the Federal Trade Commission. So I don't know how to fully assess Walsh's tenure, but I do think the administration, with exceptions, obviously we can talk about the rail situation, although that is governed by a set of laws that are pretty restrictive. I don't think that successes or the failures have anything to do with Marty Walsh in terms of labor.
Okay, so fair enough. And so let's talk about Julie Su, because she was his number two. She comes from an activist background and labor lawyer in many respects, I guess you could arguably say. Represented
workers in California, right, David, who were migrants or something of that.
Yeah, it was like Thai garment workers who were effectively engaged in practices that could be called wage slavery. I mean, they were really exploited workers, and this is how she sort of rose to prominence. That's how she became known. Then she became the labor secretary of the state of California, and then number two. at labor, where she did a novel thing. She actually moved to Washington for a job based in Washington.
Yeah, and we should say people work remotely, but when you're talking about an administration, right? But it's easier when you're the executive editor, because you don't necessarily have to build relationships, and people are trying to get to you to push for what features they are, and frankly, if they're walking around in your house and they bump into you as you're getting a cup of coffee, they have a chance to pitch you in a way that they wouldn't if they weren't there. And that dynamic, I think, exists the same in DC. So give me your sense of, like, is this going to make a difference? And if so, what will we see?
Well, I think it has the potential to. There are certainly a number of things that labor has promised that they would work on that haven't been fully completed yet. One big thing are the change in the overtime laws, which was supposed to come online, I believe, a year ago, and that would make more people eligible for overtime. To sum it up, so that's
millions more people. In other words,
yeah.
Right? I mean, millions and millions of more people who have now been sort of like classified
as managers. There's a pay threshold above which you don't qualify, and this would raise that threshold. So yeah, I mean, there are certainly some opportunities there. Obviously, the implementation of the laws that have been passed, whether you're talking about chips or you're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, has a big part of that is creating and sustaining a new workforce, right? And that workforce is in advanced manufacturing, it's in clean energy, it's in semiconductors. And so the next labor secretary has to be mindful of ways to sustain that industry, to make sure that we have the workforce we need for it, and to make sure that that industry doesn't fall into traps of the past, where you get, instead of robust guidelines for construction, project labor agreements, union neutrality, things like that it ends up, you end up getting a bunch of exploited workers, temporary workers doing itinerant labor. I think there are real opportunities for the Labor Department to get involved in that. The question is, is she going to have the relationship with Joe Biden to really be an economic player, like a player on the economic team? That remains to be seen. But I think she's in a good position, and certainly she's been lauded by the entire labor movement, seen as progressive and engaged, maybe in a way that Marty Walsh wasn't, and which we can talk about. There's the fact that she's the top deputy makes it puts her in a very strong position to be confirmed, even if there are centrist pro-business Democrats that don't want to see it.
And you wrote a piece about this, actually, where essentially, like, they can not confirm her, but she's going to be there, because of the Schumer doesn't necessarily have to bring up a vote for anybody, because she's the acting head statutorily, and that's it. So
right, the statute says that the deputy labor secretary is the acting secretary until such time as an appointment is made. And so she can just sit there and be the acting secretary really for the duration. There's no time limit for the duration of the Biden administration. She can be the labor secretary as long until there's a vote held. And so for someone like a Joe Manchin who might want to show independence with Biden or Kirsten Sinema, they could hold out and say, we're holding off on this vote, but the labor secretaries will be the same regardless of what they do.
I want to return to the piece you wrote about monopoly in the labor movement in a minute, but just to stay on that the FAA, the head of the FAA, is also being held up right now by Ted Cruz, and I can't remember the second senator, and ostensibly because they need this person needs a waiver because they were in the military 22 years ago, and they've been head of the Denver airport, and I just, like, why, like, I understand, like, you alluded to it, like maybe Manchin wants to seem like I'm not a rubber stamp for Joe Biden, so I'm not going to approve this labor secretary just because. But why does Ted Cruz have an issue with who the head of the FAA is? Does he have like a genuine like aeronautic complaint with this guy? Like, I don't get it.
It seems just like picking a fight. Phil Washington, I know of him here. I talked to him because he's the head of LA Metro now. He was the head of the Denver airport, but now he's the head of LA Metro. And he's been very tangentially related to this whole thing with Eric Garcetti and a staffer who was accused of sexual harassment. And so that's part of it, just sort of adding an air of scandal around this. There's no indication he was involved in that in any way whatsoever, but just adds this sort of aroma. The thing is that to get that waiver, you need a vote of the Senate and the House. Now, normally on executive appointments, it's really just the Senate that plays a role. But in this case, because you need a waiver because he was in the military 22 years ago, and he's therefore not a civilian, but a military veteran, the House needs to vote on that waiver, and the House is in Republican hands. And so this is just Republicans using whatever they have at their disposal to just gum up the works of the Biden administration. And now, the problem is that just a couple months ago, we had this situation at the FAA where half the planes in America went to a stop because there was this faulty warning that was sent out. Obviously, that calls for a certain urgency in getting some leadership at this agency to figure out what the heck went on. But for Republicans, I think it was just a game.
But don't you think it's a little bit woke, the FAA? It's a little bit woke, right? It's a little too woke. And so maybe that's what the problem is. And I don't know. I found that just sort of interesting that they're going to, any opportunity they have to be able to grandstand in this way, they're going to take it. Even for the FAA, which again is like not necessarily, you would think, a hotbed of sort of political controversy, but tell us about this, the problems that we see with monopoly and labor, because we're seeing this in the context of of freight trains. We see it in other areas. And we see this conflict in other places, like even the Willow Project, which is this ConocoPhillips sort of like massive oil drilling venture up in Alaska and the North Slope, that the Biden administration seems to be sort of like trying to negotiate to offer, I don't know, part of it to Conoco. We see there also labor bouncing up against the environmental movement. In some respects, we're even seeing like indigenous folk, wanting the jobs, like that tension of more jobs versus just about anything else exists with unions in particular. In other cohorts as well. But talk about how this is sort of like coming to a head in certain areas.
Well, I wrote about earlier this week when it seemed like Sarah Nelson was potentially a candidate for the Labor Department job before Biden announced this week that Julie Su would get it. There's this interesting situation with regard to a merger between JetBlue and Spirit, a proposed merger. These are two of the low-cost carriers that provide a little bit of competition with the major airlines, four of which control about 80% of the routes. And they're looking to merge. And, we've seen close to a dozen mergers in the airline space in the last 15 years. None of them have been good for workers on aggregate. They reduce the amount of bidders for the services of flight attendants and ground workers and everything. And yet, Sarah Nelson, who is the head of the Association of Flight Attendants and represents the Spirit Airlines flight attendants, came out in favor of the merger and said, we're going to get all of these perks. We're going to get increases in pay. We're going to get certain guarantees in terms of our work and things like that. There's this dilemma that labor has when they're dealing with mergers like this, and sometimes you see it go one way and sometimes you see it go the other, in that the labor movement itself is fairly weak in the United States. And so if they do what's probably best for the overall labor movement, which is seek to have these mergers blocked, that doesn't do anything for their individual circumstances, which are in tension. Right. So they try to use. It's rare when labor has leverage to use, and so when they get it, they try to use it. And in this case, we'll give you support for this merger if you give us better pay, better conditions, better work hours, things like that. And so you see this happen often. Now, what's interesting here is that the flight attendants for JetBlue are covered by a different union, and they oppose the merger. The way this will work is if those two entities merge, there will be an election for which union gets to service the flight attendants on the new merged company. And my understanding is there's a strong likelihood that Sarah Nelson's group, AFA, would win that. And so there's sort of internal politics here going on as well. But this is always an issue where the interests of the individual union and its individual circumstances can come into conflict with the interests of workers overall. And so it's a dilemma that we haven't really figured out how to deal with best. And that's why I wrote it.
How different is this environment or the circumstances from, say, like 10 years ago when Obama approved that American Airlines merger and as you say, David, the consequences were bad for workers, bad for the consumer. Like, I mean, it seems like there has been a bit of a seismic shift, at least in the way the Biden administration approaches this.
Certainly. And what I was talking about in that context, when it looked like Sarah Nelson was still, a candidate for labor secretary, is that the administration has this whole of government approach where they say every agency has to look at the impact of competition on their particular areas of influence. And here's Sarah Nelson saying, I want to be labor secretary or being vetted to be labor secretary, who's approving of a merger in her industry. And so that just sort of served to highlight this even more, that the Biden administration has taken this particular line, which individual unions might not see that way. They see it as an opportunity rather than something that they have to fight.
What do you think the solution is to something like that? Because to me, the first thing I think about is we need to reform Taft-Hartley. Like that the road to dealing with that is to make it less relevant by strengthening labor in other ways.
I mean, I agree. I think that a stronger, more mature, more confident labor movement that thinks it has the ability to negotiate contracts without needing some sort of hook or leverage in that respect would not be one that thinks of its parochial interests first above the larger interest of and the long-term interests of workers, even its own workers, from consolidation in the economy. So yes, I think that this is more of a symbol of a weak labor movement than it is a symbol of something that's intractable.
Let's talk about the other half of that equation of like the anti-monopoly and the sort of the antitrust stuff. Lena Khan just made it into the news again. What was it, the 43rd time in the Wall Street Journal op-eds or something like that? She has to be the most written about like cabinet member, right? Outside of maybe Buttigieg, but Buttigieg is, race to the top, race to the front of people's minds because of, but maybe the most talked about FTC chair in at least maybe our lifetimes.
Yeah, in about 40 years. I mean, this is a playbook that was run actually with Carter's FTC commissioner, his chair, a guy whose last name I'm going to butcher, but it was like Michael Perchutz or something like that. Look it up. But he was a progressive. He I believe came from Public Citizen. And he was installed as Carter's FTC chair. He was immediately subject to the first wave of the corporate backlash against government regulation and government action. He was like enemy number one of the aftermath of the Powell memo, right? And
just to remind people, Lewis Powell writes a memo in 1972. There's a basically calling for corporations to push back on what they're seeing in terms of like increased environmentalism, and then Nixon puts him on the Supreme Court, which was convenient.
Right. And so there was a massive corporate backlash to the FTC in the late 1970s. And I don't have the stats on whether he was getting 2 Wall Street Journal editorials a month at that time, but he was a high-profile guy, Perchutz. And ultimately, the corporate side won. They beat down the FTC. They had them withdraw regulations that they put in. One was around advertising and children. And basically the agency went into a shell for about 40 years after that. I mean, that is the history here. The fact that Lina Khan is opening up that shell is unbelievably offensive to corporate America. And that's why you're seeing this. They're essentially running this same playbook that they ran in the late 1970s.
It's fascinating because it was almost as if, like, when they did it in the late 70s, they were loosening the soil, basically tilling the soil for the coming Borkian reinterpretation of what antitrust meant. And we saw all of the antitrust apparatus under the Reagan administration essentially adopt that Bork perspective on antitrust. 8 years is a long time. And if you get 8 years worth of, like, DOJ lawyers and FTC commissioners and who all espouse this sort of very limited notion of what when the government should exercise its antitrust authority, you've created a trajectory that ended up lasting until essentially the Biden administration, and they're responding in the same way they did when they were just like sort of loosening the soil at that time, because they realize that something has turned, and it's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah. Michael Perchuk. That is the name. I had to look it up. Perchuk. So anyway, yes. Yeah. I mean, the reason they're freaking out about this non-compete proposal, this proposal to ban these agreements that block workers from moving from one part of an industry to another because if they sign an employment contract, that bans it, is that it's not just that they like non-competes because they suppress wages. It's because they're asserting the use of rulemaking power that the FTC has essentially not used since the late 1970s. So they don't want the FTC to be comfortable with the fact they can actually write rules, even though it's in their statute that they have Section 5 of the FTC Act, rulemaking authority to ban unfair and deceptive practices. So they see this as the tip of the spear, this non-compete thing. And that's true of a lot of the initiatives that Lina Khan and her compatriots on the FTC are putting out there.
Just speak to that dynamic, because I'm not sure that people fully sort of like grasp the way that this works. Because we saw this also with Dodd-Frank in many respects too. And you see it like when you get any type of assertion by the government, industry, corporations, it's basically like, it's almost like they want to take a rolled up newspaper and smack the dog on its nose, because then the dog knows, like, I don't go there anymore. And so like that's the theory, right? It's not just like this one thing. They don't want the precedent set. They want to set the precedent that if you exert all this energy involved in the months and months that go into like a major, policy implementation like this, you're going to waste your time. And so we're going to hit you so hard that next time you think about doing this, you're going to go, you know what? Let's be a lot less ambitious and let's stick to our lane is much more marginal than this.
Right. I mean, they call it the chilling effect for a reason. They're trying to stop and intimidate the agency into not fulfilling its mandate. And that's why we're probably going to see this non-compete deal go to court. The Chamber of Commerce came out with a long statement. The first comment of which was from a debt collection company. So like, this is the groups that you're hearing say this is problematic. But they're going to fight this tooth and nail because they don't want the precedent set. Absolutely.
Let's just while we're here on monopolies, you had written quite extensively about this Amazon sort of like tour they were on, the sweepstakes. Will you be lucky enough to get the HQ? And you were writing, I mean, contemporaneously, this is bullshit. They're not, this is like, it's not just bullshit in the sense that like, hey, we shouldn't have all these municipalities sort of kowtowing to, one giant behemoth, private behemoth. That's a bad look. You were basically saying like, this is bullshit. It's not even, it's like a fake sweepstakes.
Yeah, it was misdirection. I mean, the point of the exercise from Amazon's perspective wasn't to cite a new headquarters. It was to get a bunch of information from hundreds of cities about their economies, about what they're willing to spend to bring Amazon into their community, about where the fertile locations in those communities are. It was a wealth of information that they were able to acquire, and then they were able to use that in building out their logistics business. So, we need a new warehouse in the Southeast. Well, hey, let's look at the pile of HQ2 headquarters applications. Hey, here's this city in the Southeast that says that right here on I-64, that's the best, the best route to get things out to businesses. Oh, and they say they're willing to give us $700 million. Right. Oh, okay. Well, let's go to that city and figure out what they're going to do for us. That was the project. That was it was an intelligence gathering exercise. It had nothing to do with building a headquarters. And now we see that the winner of this exhibition, which was in Arlington, Virginia,
so many jobs coming to Arlington, Virginia with this headquarters. So many jobs that it was like horrific for people like AOC to fight this in New York City, because New York, nobody comes to New York anymore for business. But at least Arlington, Virginia got how many jobs? Like so many jobs, right?
Well, they've paused now the second headquarters, the construction of the second headquarters. Interestingly, years after New York City finally banned, essentially Amazon took its toys and went home and said, oh, well, we're not giving you the second headquarters. Employment from Amazon in New York City went up in the years after that, because it had nothing to do with this headquarters. They're going to put in people where they need to put in people, and by the same token, this headquarters now there's circumstances certainly change for Amazon. We have working from home. We have the tech sort of downturn that we've seen in the last year. There are certainly circumstances that go beyond what Amazon knew at the time when they gave Arlington this second headquarters. However, my point is, this was not really an important factor for Amazon in the putting together of this sweepstakes anyway. They just wanted a bunch of cities to kiss the ring and give them information. And they did. And Amazon has been rewarded many times over by virtue of having that information.
And this is, another example of why monopolies and concentration of wealth and corporate power is so damaging to our society, completely separate from how much it's going to cost you to buy something on Amazon. But it basically makes all of these municipalities expend resources on a sweepstake. Like they all jump, like how high should we jump? And they give up all this data and information that Amazon competitors do not have. And so Amazon comes in and has this incredible advantage, which is going to hurt local businesses. It's going to hurt local employers. It's going to push down the cost of labor to them, and basically the wage earning potential of other people.
It's going to reduce the tax base, because I mean the whole point of this was how much money they can squeeze out of these companies for building a warehouse.
The cities.
And so whereas cities, if Amazon came to your town and 5,000 workers are now at a warehouse in your town, that would be a significant benefit for the town, the treasury of the town, in terms of the tax base, in terms of property taxes and everything else. Now all of those are going to be taken away, right? Because Amazon's saying, well, look, I'll put it in the city 5 miles west of you if you don't give me X, Y, Z. And the city says we're being held up, and that's what we're going to do.
Let's also talk. I've got one more story that you covered here. Oh, and maybe we'll touch on the Fed if we get a second. But you just did a piece about what's going on in East Palestine, and that is a story that has everything to do with monopoly in many respects. It has everything to do with sort of like the regulatory state. And but you did a piece on, and I was really surprised to find this. I always assumed if the EPA, whether it's the state EPA or the federal EPA, is coming in and says the air is good, that they took the tests. But it appears that's not the case, at least in East Palestine.
They've done some of the testing, right? The EPA, but Norfolk Southern, which is the company that the rail company where this derailment happened, it was their train. They have contracted with a company called the Center for Toxicology and Environmental Health, which certainly sounds like a government agency, right? Like if you were told the Center for Toxicology and Environmental Health is coming to your house to test the air, you would think, oh, well, this must be somebody in government. This must be some state agency or federal agency. No, it's a private for-profit company that follows along companies like Norfolk Southern, gets contracted to do this work. And invariably, their estimates line up with what the corporation is saying, which is usually that there is no problem with the air or water or soil in this particular area. The CTEH has been working, they've been established in 1997. They were at 9/11. They were at, after Katrina, at some of the oil spills there. They were at the Deepwater Horizon BP scandal, when coal ash was pushed into the communities in Tennessee, when there was a chemical explosion in Houston in 2019. Virtually every major environmental disaster of the last 20 years, this random company shows up and says, everything's okay. Everything's fine. And they're paid for by the company to do that.
Yes. Well, that was the point I wanted to get to, right? It's not like they just show up or they're, as you say, a government agency that's required to do this. They're contracted by these companies. So
right.
The incentive
they're paid for.
Yeah, the incentive is to underreport because the company's now liable for whatever the damages are.
Right. And usually these toxicology reports not only are meant to reassure residents, they're meant to try to persuade them not to sue. because they say, well, look, we have this information. It says it's safe. They are used as expert witnesses in court cases, saying we did the tests and everything was fine. There was a situation that I bring out with another train derailment with a company called CSX, was the rail company there, in 2012 in Kentucky. And CTH was brought on site during the cleanup phase. And they said, the ground is fine. It's okay for you to do whatever you want. Go ahead and clean up the wreck. And two workers started using a torch to cut around a piece of the wreckage. And immediately the soil was flammable and that all blew up. And CTH settled that for $18.5 million because these two individuals had severe burns, severe injuries to themselves. This is something that we've heard periodically about this company, is that their testing methodologies, the ways in which they collect samples have been criticized by scientists, by toxicologists over and over and over again. One of them said to the New York Times, they're paid to say it's okay.
They're not referenced by the EPA, are they? Or is it just like they're out there like a PR firm?
Yeah, and PR is a very good way of putting it. Norfolk Southern put out this, it looked like a video news release. It looked like something that could be picked up by a local broadcast station. This 2-minute video that shows CTEH scientists or people conducting these tests saying everything's okay, and it's a remarkable piece. You remember in the Bush administration where they would put together these news reports, and the news stations would just take them whole cloth and just run them, pick them up. That's what this looks like. And
the thing is, it reminds me of it seems completely analogous to the ratings agencies that we saw during the financial crisis, where it's like,
they're paid
we've
by
got
the
this
issue.
tranche of loans, and we hire you to assess them, and they go, oh, they're really good.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, good. You're a great rating agency. But in that situation, there's no it is, buyers beware type of situation. And I do think that's problematic, frankly. Anyways, we should not allow that as a government, as a society. We should not allow that dynamic. But this seems even worse, because if you're out there to make a public health pronouncement, right? It seems to me that you need to be licensed and sanctioned by the EPA. Are they in any way? What?
I mean, they say that they work, in the statement they gave me, they say they work with the EPA. They say they give,
so
their
don't
assessments to the,
when I don't go on to when I see
agencies.
a sign that says the EPA says don't go through this fence, I'm working with them. What does that mean? We work with them.
Exactly. I mean, well, that's a good question. And by the way, just because the EPA has a government imprimatur doesn't mean that they aren't susceptible to this kind of stuff either.
Of course.
And we have a piece coming pretty soon about that aspect of it. There have been several congressional reports about, toxic sites, whether it was Camp Lejeune in North Carolina or after 9/11, certainly the EPA said everything was okay. Where the EPA seemed to wither in the face of industry lobbying, for their side of the story. And CTH is sort of a part of that dynamic, right? I mean, this is
becomes harder for the EPA to say hey, there's a problem here, when CTH is coming out and going we did our testing, it looks good.
Right. Independent science, right? Independent. Yeah. And then the other interesting thing here is that this is part, CTH was bought in 2020 by this company called Montrose, which appears to be cornering the market on these types of environmental consulting firms. They've bought 65 firms in the last 10 years. And they say in their annual report that we have thousands of potential other acquisitions that we can pick up, and they are poised to become the market leader in this kind of environmental consulting. That seems pretty dangerous to me when you have this corporate consultant that is sort of known as the go-to for a get out of jail free card, essentially, for corporations who pollute the atmosphere.
Also makes it hard for, like genuinely independent sort of monitors of maybe air quality to step in and go like, hey, wait a second, we do think there's a problem here. But David Dayen, well, I wanted to just get your take on the Fed, but I know what your take is on the Fed. They're going to raise rates because they're going after labor again.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly seems to be the case. They've been in the last week talking about how, this report, the one report we happen to look at, which slices and dices the data in a certain way. Well, that one's going up a little bit, so we're going to have to raise interest rates again. Forget about all the other data that actually shows inflation easing.
Right, and they're desperate to disempower labor, right? I mean, this seems to me to be the dirty little secret of what they're doing, is that inflation is a fig leaf, it seems to me, to make sure that wages don't go up.
I don't think it's a secret. I mean, they're saying that this is what they want to do. That this is going to be painful for labor, and I think it's. But aren't they? But don't they? Definitely worth.
But don't they pretend it's like labor is? I mean, it's almost as if they're saying is like inflation is holding labor in front of it, and to shoot inflation, we're just going to have to pierce the body of labor, and that's just a unfortunate byproduct. But in fact, I'm convinced it's not. It's really they're just aiming at labor, and they're pretending it's about inflation.
They're setting up a causal connection between inflation and increases in wages and the hot labor market. When the Federal Reserve's own regional banks have put out report after report that say, no, actually, the main driver of inflation was supply chain problems or corporate greed or opportunistic inflationary increases by private companies, and that demand, which would be the wage factor there, is a smaller part of the picture. Literally, the San Francisco Federal Reserve, the Kansas City Federal Reserve has said this. So if you talk to the economists who actually look at the numbers, that's what they say. If you talk to the chair and the top governors, they say, well, this is obviously a wage problem. I mean, the point is that they have one button at the Federal Reserve, and all they know is whether to push that button. And they still have this mindset like it's the 1970s and we're in a wage price spiral. And that's the only way to affect it is to hit the button really, really, really hard. And, situations actually are different.
But do you think that's what this is what I'm asking? Do you think it's that they only know one response to this? Or is it that they really just the secret part is that the goal is to disempower labor? Inflation is secondary almost to that, because if they were really concerned about inflation, they could say like, we've done as much as we can do. I mean, certainly they do that on the stimulus side at different times.
Right.
They could say like, we have exhausted our tools because this inflation is not something that has to do with monetary policy. It's not a question of demand. It's nothing that we can really fundamentally impact. But instead, I think what they are doing is really just saying that, our third mandate is actually, even though our second one is to increase employment, our third mandate is also to make sure that there's not that much employment.
Well, that's what you put it right. I mean, the dual mandate is supposed to be price stability and full employment. But really, there's only one mandate, and that's price stability. And that's because the people whispering in the ear of central bankers come from Wall Street, and they, on net, are harmed by higher by higher employment, hotter employment market, and on net they benefit from lower inflation. And so they're more interested in the price stability aspect. And so the central bank is more interested in the price stability aspect.
David Dayen, executive editor of The American Prospect, frequent guest on whatever the name of that show that Jon Stewart has. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Look, I mean, you probably have a bigger output than Apple TV, I would say.
Without a doubt. Are you kidding? I didn't even know that Apple TV was still around. They're still putting that out?
So maybe you shouldn't be so defensive about it.
No, I'm not defensive about it. It's just he messed
You're
up.
You're the one being defensive.
He just messed up my my whole bow tie move 15 years ago. So I'm still
undercutting Tucker Carlson.
17 years ago.
It's not defensive. 18. He's bitter.
Yeah, I'm bitter. It's bitterness.
That's a totally different emotion. All right.
Thanks very much, buddy. Appreciate it. All right, folks. That is it for the first half of the program. We're going to take phone calls in the, I didn't really save that much time. My clock management these days, really
bad.
Not good.
Call you Mike McCarthy.
I don't know what that means. Folks.
Dallas Cowboys coach.
Emma's amusing herself over here.
Yeah. I thought Bradley might be listening, but he's just not. He heard me, just didn't think it was good. Yeah.
I just
Folks,
internally laughed.
Yeah, great.
It is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. You will help the show survive and thrive. Jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. You get 10% off. Emma, what's happening on ESPN? Took Thursday off, apparently.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're not doing, well, we don't have any competition right now, so we're still figuring that out. But
that wasn't it. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah,
Keep going.
Do you need more runway?
No. Okay, go ahead. You said you what? You don't have enough, not enough competition going on?
Competition kicking in.
Shoot. Wow. All right, that was all I was going for.
But I did have Matt Leck. You might know him on Monday, and we spoke about the NBA, the Wolves, the Knicks, the load management debate that was brought up by Anthony Edwards and
I did some optimism about the Wolves.
Yes, I did optimism about the Knicks. So if you want to see delusion, you can go to youtube.com/ESPN show.
Bruins got to 100 points in the NHL faster than any team in the history of the NHL.
I know. They're completely stacked. Don't really understand how the Rangers are going to beat them. But yeah, I mean,
how much time do you think Marty Walsh spent working on the Department of Labor over the past couple of months? I mean, how many meetings does it take to become...
Well, he's not going to work for the NHL. He's going to work for the NHLPA. So that's a little bit better. He's going to head the union.
Okay, that's great. But my point is that how many interviews do you think it takes to get that job?
Oh, well, I mean,
how much time do you think he's actually working in the Department of Labor as opposed to
You'd be shocked to know that the Bruins owner is a donor to his mayoral campaign in Boston. Well, I mean, my heart bleeds for Boston fans. You know, you guys have gone nearly 4 years without a championship. So you really earned it with this Bruins stacked team. Anyway,
thank you.
So check out, I did do some NHL talk as well, but yeah, youtube.com/ESPN show.
Matt Leck Media. What's happening there?
Yeah, Amina Sheikh talked to David about some Canadian politics stuff, and we got into landlord TikTok in the postgame, patreon.com/leftreckoning to access that, and we'll be talking about Rosa Luxemburg this week for patrons.
See you in the fun half, 646-257-3920.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back, 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 back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back, back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back, back.